February 24th, 2026. 3 lives ended in the Caribbean Sea. Not terrorists, not enemy soldiers. But the United States military executed them anyway. Narcotics carriers. That's what the Trump administration says they were. No official report confirms how much was recovered. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Quietly, this has been happening more often. And that raises an uncomfortable question. When did military strikes become part of drug enforcement? In recent months, quite a few operations have taken place across known trafficking routes. These routes run through the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific Ocean. They are among the busiest narcotics corridors in the world. Small vessels move through them every day, fast, low profile, hard to track. The United States has long monitored these waters, usually through the Coast Guard, with interception and arrests. But in these recent operations, military assets have taken a more direct role. Surveillance aircraft, naval units, expanded authority. Officials say they want to disrupt trafficking before it reaches land, before the cargo disappears, before the network adapts. They describe these actions as necessary, part of a broader effort to counter organized narcotics operations. But each strike carries consequences. Because at sea, there is no courtroom, no immediate oversight, only decisions made in real time, and outcomes that can't be reversed. Someone makes these calls, but who? This strike was legally possible because the military already had the authority. That authority had been expanded under counter-narcotics missions, and these missions allow the military to detect and stop drug trafficking vessels. They also allow the use of direct force when authorized. So this wasn't one soldier acting alone. It moved through a chain of command. Approved, reviewed, authorized. Each strike reflects a decision already permitted under those rules. Not improvised, not accidental, authorized. Officials say this authority exists to stop trafficking before interception becomes harder. But authority changes behavior. Once force is used successfully, it becomes a viable option. And that changes what future responses look like. Because the next time a similar vessel appears, the option already exists, proven, available, ready. But authorization alone doesn't explain the timing. Why now? Because policy priorities shifted. In recent years, U.S. leadership began treating narcotics trafficking as a national security threat, not just a criminal issue, a security risk. That distinction matters. Because criminal threats are handled with arrest, security threats allow a broader force. This shift changed how responses could be authorized. Military involvement became more central, more direct. Officials argued that trafficking networks had grown too powerful, too organized, too fast, and traditional enforcement alone was no longer enough. So the mission expanded, not publicly announced as a single decision, but implemented through operational changes, until the use of military force became part of the available response. And once that option exists, you don't need a new permission each time. You only need a target. Which means the strike on February 24th wasn't just about that boat. It was about proving this option would be used. By February 24th, this was no longer an isolated response. Similar strikes had already taken place in the months before, across the Caribbean, across the Eastern Pacific. Quietly, without sustained public attention. These operations expanded under existing counter-narcotics missions, but their visibility remained limited. Most people never heard about them. No national address, no formal announcement of a new phase, only operational results. One vessel at a time, one decision at a time. This is how operational shifts usually happen, not through a single declaration, but through repeated action. Until the action itself becomes the signal. By the time the February 24th strike made headlines, the method was no longer theoretical. The day proved something irreversible. This was no longer off limits. Out there, you don't see it coming. No sirens, no radio call, no second chance to explain yourself. One moment, you're moving across open water. Next, someone else has already decided for you. You don't get a courtroom. You don't get questions. You're just a signal on a screen, a heat signature, a moving dot. And someone, somewhere, decides what that dot means. Friend, civilian, or threat. And once that decision is made, distance protects them, not you. You never see their face, you never hear their voice, only the outcome reaches you. And now, everyone running those routes knows this. They know interception is no longer guaranteed. They know survival is no longer guaranteed. Because February 24th proved that the ocean no longer guarantees distance, it guarantees exposure. But why do you care? It's just about drug boats, and they should be disrupted by any means. And that's fair. What's not fair is the evidence problem. They told you it was a drug boat, but no drug quantities were released. No identities confirmed, no cartel affiliation verified. Just a strike and a statement. The Pentagon has acknowledged in multiple briefings that they don't always know who was killed. Let that sit. In the very first strike on September 2nd, 2025, all 11 people on board died. Then, U.S. forces struck survivors of that same vessel in follow-up attacks. Congress noticed. Senate Armed Services demanded unedited footage and authorization orders from Hegseth. A bipartisan NDAA amendment passed. Release the footage or Hegseth loses part of his travel budget. The footage still hasn't been released. And there's a number. Bothering enough. CBP cocaine seizure data through January 2026 shows no decline. Monthly averages are actually slightly higher since the strikes began. Trump claimed each boat strike saves 25,000 lives. No methodology, no sourcing, just a number. If the evidence was clean, none of this would be hidden. You're not asking for classified intelligence. You're asking for basic proof. If the evidence is weak, what's actually authorizing these strikes? The Trump administration's argument fits on a napkin. Article 2, Commander-in-Chief. You've got boats run by foreign terrorist organizations, and in 2025, they designated 19 new FTOs. Those include Venezuela's Cartel of the Suns. These boats have no flag, no registration, no legal identity. Under maritime law, that means you have zero protection. So, does the government has legal cover to sink them? Their answer is yes. That's the whole case. But somewhere, it falls apart. There is no congressional authorization for strikes on drug cartels in the Caribbean. Not the 2001 AUMF. Not the 2002 Iraq AUMF. You can go through every authorization on the books. Nothing covers this. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 says you need congressional sign-off for sustained hostilities. Without it, you're sitting in exactly the scenario the Supreme Court warned about in Youngstown versus Sawyer, 1952. There, they said, presidential power hits its lowest ebb when Congress hasn't said yes. And international human rights law says lethal force is only legal as a last resort, against an imminent threat to life. A boat on a known drug route doesn't clear that bar. 2 War Powers resolutions were introduced to stop the strikes. Both failed, narrowly, in a Republican-controlled Senate. Families of 2 men from Trinidad and Tobago were killed in an October 2025 strike. Their families filed a federal lawsuit in January 2026. Those are still pending. But what about the UN? The US holds veto power at the Security Council, so that door closes even before it opens. So here's where you actually are. No domestic authorization, no international enforcement, and the court case is years from a verdict. That's not a legal gray area. That's not a loophole. That is a legal void. And inside that void, such strikes keep happening. Now, let's get back to the timeline. September 2025. Boat strikes begin, Caribbean Sea. Counter narcotics. That's the framing. Next, December 2025. First land target in Venezuela. A marine facility, CIA drone. They said it was used to load drug boats. Then, January 3rd, 2026, U.S. forces bomb targets in Caracas. Venezuelan air defenses go down. Pre-dawn raid. Maduro captured. Operation Absolute Resolve. That escalated fast. Trump speaks after the capture. The U.S. was going to run Venezuela's oil. That's all. Now zoom out for a second. Maduro had an active federal indictment. Drug charges, weapons charges, legitimate case. But there's another layer. Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves. The former head of the UN Drug Office said it flat out, this isn't a drug war, it's geopolitics. The World Drug Report 2025 actually documented Venezuela's cooperation record. None of that stopped what came next. By January 2026, the U.S. had deployed 15,000 personnel in the region. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, 3 amphibious assault ships, Aegis destroyers, B-52s flying within miles of the Venezuelan coast, F-35s based in Puerto Rico. That's not a drug enforcement operation. CSIS called the boat strikes the opening move. Venezuela was the direction, and the strikes gave them a path to get there. And once you have a path, you keep walking it. As of February 23, 2026, 44 strikes, 45 vessels. Most of you didn't know that number. Because the strikes have largely faded from the headlines, other news took over. And while your attention was elsewhere, it kept going, weekly, quietly. That's not an accident. That's how normalization works. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called for an immediate halt. A group of UN human rights experts called the strikes extrajudicial executions. Amnesty International called one strike murder. Colombia, China, and Iran condemned them as illegal under international law. And 71% of Americans in an October poll still supported them. That gap tells you everything about how effective the framing was. Call someone a narco-terrorist. Don't release evidence. The vast majority of fentanyl behind fatal overdoses comes through land ports of entry on the southern border. CBP's own data puts 95% of it at the US-Mexico land border. The Caribbean sea boats are not the fentanyl pipeline. That's documented. So what exactly are these strikes solving? That's the question nobody in power is answering, and nobody is asking it either. Because the strikes were never designed around that question. They were designed around a different one. How far can this go before anyone stops it? And so far, the answer is further than last month. No court has blocked it, no congressional vote has stopped it, no international body has enforced anything. What's been established instead is something much simpler and much more dangerous. The president can designate a target. At sea, order a lethal strike. That's not another counter-narcotics operation. That's a new set of rules dressed in one. And the problem with new rules is always the same. They don't stay where they started. The strikes are still happening. No vote stopped them. No court blocked them. Is this necessary enforcement or a line that was never meant to be crossed? Tell me what you think and subscribe. The story isn't over yet.